So I've designed this talk with the idea of a non-specialist in mind, because the more I do work with people like polytechnic engineers who are interested in trees for various good reasons, and who are interested in slopes and trees to save the slopes from a fate which happens when we get heavy rain. Today was very heavy rain and very windy. So the title of the story is perhaps a attractive, stimulating title: Phytopathology, a story of bad mushrooms. And so, because I might be talking to a wide range of people, some biologists who didn't like fungi, some biologists who love fungi, like Dr. Stella Chan, who knows a lot about one particular twist in this story, we've got a little bit of teaching. And I hope that A-level students in the UK and the equivalent in Hong Kong can also have a look at this, because there's a lot of assumptions and science buried together in it. So we have the word phytopathology. Having taught postgraduate students at the Open University, quite often they are a bit scared of big words. And so we've got a little bit of the Greek and Latin behind. Pathos, not a nice word. Pathos. In this age of COVID, we're very conscious of the bad side of viral particles. And then we have logi. And so I put it together, and I try and get a class even of postgraduates. Many of them are lawyers or social workers or teachers who haven't done any environmental stuff, to say phytopathology. And so the story number 2, I hope you can see it clearly, ladies and gentlemen, it's about phytopathology in action. And I think you'll enjoy it. I'm sure you've heard of good mushrooms. I love good mushrooms. And until recent times and recent years, I thought nearly all mushrooms were good. But of course, we don't have that luxury. They belong to this fabulous, challenging group. And the more I go into it in recent times, although I started with it nearly 50 years ago, I realize how little we do not know about the Basidiomycetes. I get my students to say Basidiomycetes and pretend they're sitting on them. So let's go up. Now, many of them are good, but this story is about plant diseases in action. And some are bad. Some of these fungi are bad. And the bad is measured when they weaken, kill, destroy. In Hong Kong, and believe it or not, we have a great sensitivity to OVTs, old and valuable trees. They decorate some of our excellent urban parks. They save hillsides in the remote new territories. And as the chairman just said a moment ago, they have a cultural significance in which I'm very interested in. I've done some work where we have the merging of culture and science in the whole doctrine teaching of feng shui. These 2 mushrooms are also known as bracket fungi, because, as you'll see later on when we have a look at some of the structural details of these fungi, they form brackets. Sometimes they give us a clue that they've invaded an old and valuable tree, but the clue comes late. And as you can see in the middle of this sentence, I wish I was standing in front of you live, you can see sometimes it's too late to stop their pathogenesis. The fungi are remarkable. Some, and we're still studying this. I have a friend who is a top forest pathologist in New Zealand. We're doing MSc together way back in the early 70s. And some can change from saprophyte to parasite to exploit opportunities. And so they have. as saprophytes especially, and all ecology students and all ecologists know, an important role as decomposers of dead organic matter. This is their ecology. They're opportunistics. So when we come to phytopathology in action, we come to pathogenesis, and it's tricky. And we're working with the PolyU, Hong Kong PolyU, to try and streamline these slow making cultures and Cox postulates efforts that we have to use to identify them, to try and use the gases they produce. Now that's something in a separate lecture, but there's some exciting developments in this area to try and speed up detecting pathogenesis. And there's a little bit about the word pathos and genesis. And some of the students love to hear, as I love to mention, the Greek connections. Now, very soon I'm going to show you 3 videos, all freshly made, with you in mind, Hong Kong in mind, and the UK in mind. Some of the literature behind all this story is coming from the UK, and it goes right back to my MSc honours days in New Zealand, where I worked on dying mangroves and how to stop certain fungi. So let's just have another look at the next bit, and then we'll go to the first video. I'd like you to see this tree. Now this tree is, can you see it? You'll see the trunk in a moment. There am I standing beside this trunk. It's about 4.67 meters at GBH, girth at rest height. And that tree was in its defoliated state. Didn't show any signs of infection. So I started working on it. And this is where our story goes to the Banyan, scientific name Ficus microcarpa, referring to the size of its leaves, its small leaves. Now, if you're in a class or you're in a lecture theatre, because the video's coming and these are sort of notes to help you capture some of the key ideas, I often invite people to make notes. It's very old-fashioned, but making notes. And I met 2 young people from Hong Kong going to study at London University and Manchester University. And remarkably, these 21-year-olds, they said, "Oh, Professor, I do like making notes." During Zoom, they found it a great way of enhancing their learning, making their own notes. Cultural significance. Let's see the first video. Thank you, Dr. Stella.
Good evening, everybody, and good morning if you happen to be in the UK. This is Professor Maxwell in Hong Kong, and we're going to make our talk this time about phytopathology. I'm touching an aerial roof here, and I'm standing under one of Hong Kong's iconic trees. In fact, the tree will be appreciated in many parts of the world, in many cultures. Did I say? Yes, I did. Phytopathology. We're going to contrast the condition of this tree, which is good, not absolutely perfect, but good, with what happens when some pathogenic fungi, to pronounce it the American way, or fungi, invade the tree. This Banyan, Ficus microcarpa, is in good condition. It probably could be slightly better, but as we look at the foliage up towards the canopy, we can see a good number of leaves. We do not see signs of infection by pathogenic fungi, which is fantastic, because a tree like this is classified in landscape terms as an old and valuable tree, OVT. And can we see some of the biology that's behind the importance of this tree? Yes, there is a nest.
Can you hear me all right? Just a short pause. The background sound is partly the roads and partly the wind, and sometimes some very happy birds. Thank you, Stella.
made by some of the birds of South China that use this fabulous area in urban downtown Kowloon, Hong Kong as a habitat. They're birds building nests from materials in this 1.9 hectare area of old and valuable trees. Sadly, one of them has been infected seriously by a pathogenic fungus. And we'll have a look at that in contrast to this tree in a moment.
Another one.
Now, everybody, this tree is a banyan tree, but it's in big contrast to the other one we just showed you a moment or two ago. This banyan is more or less the same age, but it has been invaded. Remember that word we had a moment ago, phytopathology? It has been invaded by two pathogenic fungi. The first time we noticed that was October last year, 2020. And as you can see from the earlier scan of the photograph of this tree, it is defoliated. But what were the symptoms of infection? You can't see much now, except there are some cracks in the trunk. There are some loss of bark on the root system just above the ground. And there's some scars. Later on in the presentation, I will show you some of the bracket fungi that grow with the infection of two pathogens that are infamous in the world and we worry about in Hong Kong. One is called Ganoderma, which means a shiny cap, and it forms a bracket. I'll show you that later. And the other one is called Phytopathology, which is a brown root rot. And if we dig into the soil here, we can actually find some of that. I will show that to you later on in another part. But if you look now, can you see this browny coloured material? The browny coloured root here is infected with brown root rot, a very powerful pathogen. Now, when I first looked at this tree, I want to be sure that there are clear symptoms of pathogen attack. What were the symptoms? Now, this tree has been trimmed, heavily trimmed by a top arborist to reduce the sale area of the tree in case Hong Kong gets another typhoon. This is the typhoon season now. So we removed a lot of the upper branches. But before that happened, we saw defoliation and we saw leaves becoming yellow. We saw small branches dropping from this infected banyan. So this old and valuable tree is, I would say with confidence, 99.98% sure to fail to regrow, because all our work done on huge sampling with digging into the soil around root systems, we have found that all the samples we've taken are infected with brown root rot. Noxious, not a nice pathogen. And our big worry is to make sure no contamination goes from this tree by accident, by wind, by bird transfer, or by gardeners using tools and moving them from tree to tree to infect other trees. And so this is the theme of the phytopathology story, my original training in New Zealand. I worked on dying mangroves affected by Phytopathology, another member of the fungi group. This one is far more sneaky, far more insidious. You don't see any signs until there's some yellowing or some leaf drop, and we can't be sure of just how far the infection will go. So we will also walk away from this tree
and with this banyan tree, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes, particularly in Hong Kong, but not only in Hong Kong, I've worked on it in Thailand as well. It sometimes says, I need a rest. And so it drops leaves. Then just before the leaves drop, part of the conservation inherent in this species and quite a few other trees, there may be some saving of materials. So there'll be a hint of chlorosis or yellowing of the leaves. So it is quite hard. The tree decides, even when it's healthy, to have a bit of a rest and drop 30 or 40% of the leaves. And you think, is it autumn? Is this Canada? What's going on? But banyan trees are quite tough normally, except they can't beat these two fungi. Thank you.
Touch on some other features of the phytopathology story from Hong Kong here. We'll have a short break now. Here we have the fruiting bodies of this pathogenic fungus, Ganoderma. It's probably Ganoderma aplanatum, and it has a shiny top surface and a white rim, very distinctive. But the disturbing thing in this plant pathology story is that these fruiting bodies do not appear until a very advanced stage of infection. In other words, when the tree is almost defeated, weakened, infected by this insidious fungus, Ganoderma. And I asked some of the people in this club to remove the fruiting bodies before they release spores. But it's not always, as you can see, they're in crevices of a combined root and stem system, which is typical of Banyan, Ficus microcarpa. And we will work on those. Just near here, if you come with me, you'll see some holes. Early on in the story, I was drilling in to see whether the fungus had done some damage to the root and shoot system. And also, there were fruiting bodies near here. And those holes gave me a chance to use a famous old chemical called Bordeaux mixture, which is based on copper sulfate with some lime, copper hydroxide, and some water, a famous old way of treating infection by some fungi, including this fungi. But we need to get in early. And so although I tried with Bordeaux mixture to defeat any signs of this fungi, I probably failed. Now I'm going to show you something that's called lime shock therapy that I invented to suit this particular tree. Come with me. Okay, can you see this white stuff? This white stuff near the surface is actually lime, and I will show you with slides later on. I removed most of the topsoil down to about 20 centimeters, moved it to the side, then put around about 200 kilograms of lime on the surface and covering some of these infected roots with lime. Covering some of them, because this particular fungus, both of the fungi I mentioned, do not like alkaline conditions in the soil. And this lime helps to shift the pH from acidic soil, which happens in this part of Hong Kong. It's soil that's developed from Kowloon granite, and it tends to be acidic. So I tried a lime shock therapy, a lime blitz, to try and shift the pH and repress the growth of the brown root rot fungus.
Okay, let's continue with the notes, and in these notes we have some very powerful photographs which will add a little bit more to our story of phytopathology in action. Now, at the early part of the video, we were under a banyan that, as I mentioned, wasn't really perfect, and didn't have as much as some banyan trees have in terms of foliage in the upper canopy. But compared to the one we've just looking at, it was good. And it's showing no signs, thank goodness, of infection by keeping a close eye on it. Valuable. Some people ask me about this. Club members have said, oh, let's just replace this rather ugly looking tree, but in terms of architecture, its shape is quite amazing, and that's a story in itself. The architecture of banyan has fascinated people for a long time. It's sort of almost, it's got its own physics as well as its biology. So there is a story behind it, and I want to treat it with huge respect. Some remote villages, rural villages in Hong Kong, have a banyan tree, and people gather under it and talk and reason relationships and so on. That's a very interesting story. The second one we've just seen contrasts hugely with the first, and 99% defoliated. You saw it just now in September. 100% defoliated. Number 11, the infamous, very nice word, the famous for the wrong reasons fungi. They are doing all sorts of damage. I correspond with people in Taiwan and in Japan and in New Zealand, and even some people recently in the UK about this group of fungi. Bad reputation coming from Latin for infamous. The two pathogenic fungi, Ganoderma, and I'm 90% sure that it's aplanatum as a species, but the identification of this genus, the species within the genus, is not easy. A lot of work's been done on DNA stuff, but in the end, we've still got to see whether that corresponds with what it can do in way of forming its features in the ecological setting they find themselves. They're quite variable. And of course, Phytopathology noxious, a very good name for a nasty fungus. Thank you, Stella. Now here we can see some of the fruiting bodies. I don't know whether you can see me pointing, but those sort of white ice cream-like chocolate-looking things in the central trunk area, thank you, Stella, they have got a little bit of sawdust on them. There's the distinctive white lower part, the palleus, or the cap part of the fruiting body is shiny brown, and they only appear when they're well established. Now in the root system, when you do a close-up, we have a very distinctive telltale sign of what brown root rot can do, Phytopathology noxious. It's called brown root rot, but really some people use the word white rot. But can you see those thin, brown, spidery sort of lines on it? Very distinctive. And it has weakened and whitened the wood and left that trademark for infection. That is very distinctive for brown root rot. It can be even more brown, but that's a particular stage there of an exposed root rot that I've been doing some work on. And I mentioned earlier that the PolyU are developing a technique we can put a sort of filter funnel over this exposed root and see what kind of gas combination this fungi is producing. That would be a very clever way of saving a lot of lab mycology of culture work and Koch's postulates of proving or demonstrating that the fungus is what it is, if we could get a distinctive gas identification profile. And that's work in a separate subject. We'll come back to that perhaps. Thanks, Stella. Next one. There's another shot of the same thing. You can see the brown, you can see the whiting of the wood. It shouldn't be quite white, and it's been weakened and delignified. Calm down, Professor, you're getting too much of the anatomical stuff, but I'd love to talk about the role of lignin, but that's a separate subject. We go interesting now, number 14. Unscientific names for Ganoderma. Many names, and that's why we do need the scientific name, but you can see these names: basal stem rot, white root rot, and of course Ganoderma root rot. And in case of Ganoderma, we have an interesting twist in the story about which my colleague Dr. Stella Chan knows quite a lot in terms of this medical function for Lingxi. Come back to that in a moment. Philinius noxious, brown root rot, is often abbreviated, thank goodness, to BRRD. Symptoms. It'd be so nice if they displayed the symptoms early so we could do what I do in New Zealand with pine plantations. I have a pine plantation, and some infections, we can hire a helicopter and give it a gentle shower of Bordeaux mixture of copper sulfate and knock back a number of potential pathogens, but not so easy to do that here. And you see it, yes, chlorosis we mentioned, abnormal yellowing, defoliation was almost complete, but too late, and branches falling, and of course, when you dig into the root system, we see that distinctive trademark brown root rot. Cracking and loss of bark, yes, not a nice sight. Thank you, Stella. Now, if you look at this one, this is going way back to sort of October last year, and there were a few leaves just hanging in there. And I thought, wow, is there a chance? Is there a chance that we could do something to the soil or do something to its immediate environment and repair the ecology? Because ecological stress is a key factor in the development of these symptoms and helping the fungi. So that's nothing like a banyan you saw at the beginning, only a few leaves. Fruiting bodies. You saw them a moment ago. I mentioned that the top or the flat cap part is nice and shiny and brown, and it's nice, and it has a name, Filius, which is from Latin meaning hat. Bracket fungi. And number 17 is hugely interesting and very important to the whole dynamics of phytopathology. It's not just a matter of getting rid of something bad, because Ganoderma is famous in Chinese herbal medicine. Believe it or not, it has a well-established positive role in the prevention and treatment of cardiovascular disease. Not for everyone it works perfectly, but for most people it does. And we could talk about that for a long time. A clever student once asked me, Prof, when we see filtering bodies on a tree, like this old and valuable banyan, can we help it, treat it, and save it? Unfortunately, as I mentioned several times, which is worth remembering, that the fruiting bodies come late. And so we come back to a truism. Prevention is way better than cure, so that we think of landscape management and all the other things that go with the sort of engineering of how you handle trees and what you do with their soil conditions. Prevention is really a kind of engineering solution. Root material must not be moved around. Soil must be treated with respect, and so on. And so we try hard, and I help with the training of some of the staff at the club to avoid cross-contamination. We don't want spores to start to spread and they can blow in the wind. And they may or may not infect another tree because susceptibility varies from tree to tree, even within the same species. And so when we see these fruiting bodies hiding in a corner of a root and shoot system, I view them as rather insidious or cunning. Bordeaux mixture, heard about that, a wonderful old mixture, and it can work, but not always easy to apply. And sometimes we have soil chemistry problems with it. Here is a treated fruiting body that I was experimenting to see how sensitive, in the context of Hong Kong and the context of this particular site, it might be to Bordeaux mixture. And you can see the telltale signs of the copper. It didn't like it, but it didn't suddenly retreat. It's quite a leathery sort of cap it has. And so I probably stopped it doing its sporulation. But how deep was the mycelial part of the fungus inside this massive trunk? Shock therapy, lime shock. As I mentioned, a blitz. This may work. There's some hints that it can help the soil pH story. And so when we try and change soil pH, it's not easy. We have to plan a lot to do with how to fit this hydrated lime, calcium hydroxide, and how to spread it. It's all practical stuff. We have to do a lot of calculations and train people to do it.
Prevention.
Keep going, thank you. And remove the soil without trying to, without doing any more damage to make it easier for the fungus to spread. Remove the soil from the base of the root system. This root system is very confined because it's a compact little corner of the club, thank goodness, and it can't be in physical contact with other trees. This looks like December, like Christmas time. That is a whole lot of lime applied to the surface, and then we put the soil back and try and keep people away from it. I don't want people walking around it to consolidate the soil and make it even more tricky. Steps, as you can guess now, in this lime shock therapy: remove the soil, spread the lime, return to cover the roots, wait, monitor, and I'm in the state of hope now. This is where the science comes into it. If this treatment could repress the spread or the further development, arrest the development of the brown root rot, I would be delighted with a pH shift to the alkaline. This is an ongoing experiment. Wish me luck. It's going to keep me busy while I'm still in Hong Kong and not able to go back to my farm in New Zealand for a while. We're going to see the tree before we did a huge trim. And you know there's a typhoon here, so I tried to get this trimmed in the summer and remove about 50% of the branches, make the canopy a lot less easy for wind to push over onto a very main road or damage the club facilities. And we hired some top arborists. I'm doing a bit of lab work here, and they're about to climb the tree, put the ropes in place, and take a chainsaw up there. Very exciting and dangerous work to trim 50% off this tree. You can see all the equipment and ropes, carabiners and things like that. And there's quite a skilled chap was taking his chainsaw up there. You can't see it on the other side. He's hanging from the tree and start to cut some of the canopy and share it, go down to the ground level with his team and put these branches away safely. there is up the tree again. It's not easy work, and the tree is very stable, but of course you're never sure just how deep the root system is, and it doesn't seem to go that deep in this part of Kowloon. This is the tree trimming. I'm mindful of the time, and there may be a chance for some stimulating questions. There's a lady with a very good master's degree from National Taiwan University who has been helping me with the field work. She's very keen. So any time for questions if we've got a chance. Thank you.